The smell of burning bacon filled the small kitchen, and Ruth Carter muttered under her breath as she scraped the charred strips into the trash. Three impatient voices called from the living room, each one louder than the last. "Mama, we're starving. You said breakfast would be ready 10 minutes ago. I can smell it burning from here." Ruth smiled despite herself. 5 years of raising dragons, and they still ate like they hadn't seen food in a week. She cracked another dozen eggs into the massive skillet, watching them sizzle and pop. The pan was specially made, big enough to cook for a small army, or 3 growing dragons who thought they were always on the edge of starvation. "5 more minutes," she called back. "And if I hear one more complaint, you're all eating plain oatmeal instead." Silence fell immediately. Ruth chuckled and added 6 more eggs to the pan. She'd never actually follow through on the threat, and they probably knew it, but the piece was worth the bluff. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Ash appeared first, his gray scales catching the morning light streaming through the window. He was the biggest of the 3, almost reaching Ruth's shoulder now when he stood on his back legs. His wings were still too small for proper flight, but he practiced constantly, convinced that any day now he'd figure it out. "Can I help?" he asked, trying to peek over the counter. "You can set the table," Ruth said, nudging him toward the cabinet. "And tell your brother and sister to wash their claws before they sit down." Ash groaned, but did as he was told. Cinder and Smoke appeared moments later, already bickering about who got to sit in the chair closest to the window. Ruth had given up trying to assign seats months ago. They rotated through their favorite spots like it was some kind of tactical game. She piled the eggs onto 3 enormous plates, added the fresh bacon she'd managed not to burn, and carried them to the table. The dragons fell on their food with the same enthusiasm they showed every morning, talking around mouthfuls about their plans for the day. "Can we go to the creek?" Smoke asked, the youngest and smallest of the 3. Her red scales gleamed like polished copper, and she had a habit of getting into places she shouldn't. "I want to catch more fish." "After you finish your studies," Ruth said, pouring herself a much smaller portion. "All of you." 3 faces fell in perfect unison. Ruth had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. They could synchronize their disappointment better than most military units could march in formation. "But Mama," Cinder whined, his bronze scales ruffling with indignation. "We studied yesterday, and you'll study today, and tomorrow, and every day after that," Ruth said firmly. She sat down with her own plate, much more modest than theirs. "Education is important. You want to be able to read star charts someday, don't you?" "Why?" Ash asked through a mouthful of eggs. "We live on New Haven. The stars don't go anywhere." Ruth's hand paused halfway to her mouth. She set her fork down carefully, looking at the 3 faces watching her with innocent curiosity. They had no idea that those same stars had once been her whole world, that she'd fought across dozens of systems, led fleets through impossible battles, made decisions that saved billions of lives. "You never know when you might need to travel," she said softly. "Better to be prepared." The moment passed. The dragons went back to their food, already forgetting the question. Ruth picked up her fork again, but her appetite had faded. She pushed the eggs around her plate, her mind drifting to places she'd worked hard to forget that a knock at the door startled her back to the present. The dragons looked up, curious. Visitors were rare this early in the morning. Ruth opened the door to find Administrator Willis standing on her porch, his face creased with worry. He was a decent man, fair and honest, which made him better than most colonial administrators she'd met over the years. "Ruth," he said, nodding politely. "Sorry to bother you so early. Mind if we talk for a moment?" She stepped outside, pulling the door mostly closed behind her. Through the gap, she could see 3 dragon heads trying to eavesdrop, not very successfully. "What's wrong?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Willis glanced around, making sure they were alone. "There's been reports of pirate activity in the neighboring systems. 3 raids in the last month. They're getting bolder, hitting bigger targets." Ruth felt something cold settle in her stomach. "New Haven isn't a big target." "No," Willis agreed. "But we're isolated, and our defenses are minimal. If they decided to hit us, we wouldn't last long." He paused, studying her face. You know, there's something about you that's always seemed familiar. Like I should know you from somewhere. Ruth's expression didn't change, but inside, alarm bells rang. I've got one of those faces, she said lightly. Common features. Willis didn't look convinced, but he let it drop. Just wanted you to know. Keep an eye out, stay alert. I'm hoping it's nothing, but better safe than sorry. I appreciate the warning, Ruth said. She watched him walk back down the path toward the main settlement, his shoulders tight with stress. When she turned back to the house, 3 dragons were pressed against the window, trying to look innocent and failing miserably. Ruth shooed them away from the glass and went back to cleaning up breakfast. The dishes clattered in her hands, a familiar rhythm that usually calmed her nerves. Today, it didn't work. That night, after the dragons were asleep, Ruth sat in the darkness of her bedroom. She opened the bottom drawer of her nightstand, pushing aside old clothes until her fingers found the small metal box hidden at the back. She hadn't opened it in 3 years. Inside was a communication device, old military grade, encrypted beyond anything civilians could crack, and a message waiting, the indicator light blinking red in the darkness. Ruth hesitated, her finger hovering over the play button. She almost closed the box without listening. Almost. The message was brief, just a few words in a voice she recognized from another lifetime. They're coming for the Outer Rim. We need you. Ruth deleted the message without responding. She put the device back in the box, buried it under the clothes again, and closed the drawer. Then she walked down the hall to check on the dragons, watching them sleep peacefully in their beds. Ash had kicked off his blankets again. Cinder was snoring softly, one wing draped over the edge of the mattress. Smoke clutched a stuffed bear that was nearly falling apart from years of love. Ruth pulled Ash's blanket back over him, adjusted Cinder's wing, and tucked the bear more securely under Smoke's arm. Whatever was happening in the Outer Rim, it wasn't her problem anymore. She'd made her choice 5 years ago. Her children needed her more than the galaxy did. 2 weeks passed in peaceful routine. Ruth taught the dragons their lessons each morning, let them play in the afternoons, and made sure they were fed, clean, and happy. She almost convinced herself that the message had been a mistake, that whatever trouble was brewing in the Outer Rim would stay far away from their quiet corner of the galaxy. She should have known better. The dragons were outside, racing each other across the yard in what they claimed was flight practice, but looked more like controlled falling. Ruth was pulling weeds from her vegetable garden when the siren started. The sound cut through the peaceful afternoon like a knife. Ruth's hands stilled in the dirt, every muscle in her body suddenly tense. She knew that sound. Emergency alert, the kind that meant immediate danger. Ash, Cinder, Smoke, she called, her voice sharp and commanding in a way the dragons had never heard before. Inside. Now. They didn't argue. Something in her tone made them move instantly, scrambling through the back door with their wings tucked tight. Ruth followed, her mind already running through possibilities, contingencies, escape routes she'd mapped years ago and hoped never to use. The communication panel on her wall crackled to life. Administrator Willis's face appeared, pale and frightened. All residents, this is not a drill. Unknown warships have entered the system. They're demanding our surrender. Everyone to the emergency shelters immediately. The screen switched to an external view, and Ruth felt her blood run cold. 3 massive vessels hung in orbit above New Haven, their hulls painted in the black and red colors of the KRYLL Dominion. Each ship was big enough to carry thousands of troops, armed with enough firepower to level the entire colony in minutes. Mama. Smoke's voice was small and scared. What's happening? Ruth turned to find all 3 dragons huddled together, looking at her with wide, frightened eyes. She forced her expression to soften, pushed down the tactical assessment running through her head. It's going to be okay, she said, kneeling down to their level. But I need you 3 to do exactly as I say. Can you do that for me? They nodded in unison. Good. We're going to go downstairs to the basement. There's a special room down there, very safe, very secure. You're going to wait there until I come back for you. Where are you going? Ash asked, his voice cracking slightly. Ruth didn't answer. She led them down the stairs, past the usual storage area to a heavy door set into the back wall. The dragons had never been allowed down here. She pressed her hand to the scanner, and the door hissed open, revealing a room that looked nothing like the rest of their simple house. Weapons lined one wall, organized and maintained with military precision. A communications array that could reach across star systems. Body armor hung on racks, scarred from old battles. And on a shelf, carefully preserved, a jacket with faded insignia that read Galactic Defense Corps Special Operations. The dragons stared in shock. Ruth grabbed a small emergency kit and pressed it into Ash's claws. There's food and water in here. Enough for 3 days. The door locks from the inside, and nothing short of a starship weapon can break through it. You stay here, you stay quiet, and you don't open this door for anyone but me. Understand, Mama, I don't understand, Cinder said, tears forming in his eyes. Why do you have all this stuff? What's going on? Ruth pulled all 3 of them into a fierce hug, memorizing the feel of their scales against her skin, the way they fit perfectly in her arms. I love you, she whispered, more than anything in this galaxy. And I'm going to make sure you're safe. I promise. She pulled back, looked each of them in the eye. Stay here. Stay hidden. No matter what you hear outside, you don't leave this room until I come back for you. Before they could protest, she stepped out and sealed the door behind her. She heard muffled cries from inside, the sound of small claws scratching at the metal. It took everything she had not to turn back. Instead, Ruth Carter reached for the jacket on the shelf. It had been 5 years since she'd worn it, but it still fit perfectly. She strapped on weapons with practiced efficiency, checked power cells and ammunition counts with automatic precision. Her hands moved through the familiar motions, and with each movement, she felt something old and dangerous wake up inside her. The doorbell rang. Ruth took a deep breath, checked her reflection in a polished piece of metal. The woman looking back at her wasn't the gentle mother who made breakfast and taught reading lessons. This was someone else, someone she tried to bury. She climbed the stairs and opened the door to find Administrator Willis standing there with 2 other colony officials. All 3 looked terrified. Ruth, thank God, Willis said. The KRYLL are landing troops at the main square. Our security forces are completely outmatched. We need to evacuate, but they're blocking all the routes to the shelters. Ruth looked past them at the sky. She could see landing craft descending, dark shapes against the afternoon sun. How many people haven't made it to shelter yet? She asked. At least 200, one of the officials said. Families with children, elderly residents. They're trapped in the residential sector. Willis stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. I know who you are. I finally placed your face. I saw you once, years ago, at a military ceremony. You're Ruth Carter. The Ruth Carter. He paused, searching her face. The rumors say you died at the Battle of 7 Stars. Ruth met his gaze steadily. I did die there. The woman you're looking for doesn't exist anymore. Then who are you? Willis asked desperately. Ruth looked at him, at the fear in his eyes, thought of the families trapped and scared, thought of her 3 dragons hiding in the basement, thought of everything she tried to leave behind and everything she'd built in its place. I'm their mother, she said quietly. Then her voice hardened, and her eyes went cold and calculating. And nobody threatens my children. She stepped past Willis, walking toward the main square with steady, purposeful strides. Behind her, she heard Willis calling out. What should we do? Ruth didn't look back. Get everyone to the shelters. I'll handle this. You're just one person, the official protested. Ruth smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Tell the KRYLL that. See if they believe you. The main square of New Haven was never meant to be a battlefield. Children's playground equipment stood alongside benches where elderly colonists fed birds in the morning. Now, KRYLL soldiers marched through it in formation, their weapons ready, their armor gleaming. Ruth walked into the square alone. The KRYLL commander saw her first. He was tall for his species, with the distinctive ridge markings that indicated high rank. He raised one hand, and his troops stopped their advance, watching this lone human approach with confusion. Turn back, civilian, the commander called out. This colony is now under KRYLL Dominion control. Return to your shelter, and you won't be harmed. Ruth kept walking. Her stride was steady, unhurried, like she was taking an evening stroll. She stopped about 20 feet from the commander, close enough to talk without shouting, far enough to have room to move if things went badly. "You need to leave," she said calmly. "Take your ships and get out of the system. This is your only warning." The commander stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a harsh, barking sound. His troops joined in, the square filling with mocking laughter. "You're either very brave or very stupid," the commander said. "I have 200 soldiers in this square alone, 3 warships in orbit, and you're one unarmed woman telling me to leave?" Ruth tilted her head slightly, studying him. Something about her posture, the way she held herself, made the laughter die away. The commander's amusement faded, replaced by something else. His eyes narrowed, focusing on her face. "Wait," he said slowly. "I know you. That face. I've seen it in military briefings." His voice dropped to a whisper. "That's impossible. Ruth Carter died at the Battle of 7 Stars. The records confirmed it." "I got better," Ruth said flatly. "Now leave. I won't ask again." The commander's hand moved to his weapon, but he didn't draw it. Around him, his troops shifted nervously. They'd heard the stories too. Every military force in the galaxy had. The human general who'd held impossible positions, won battles she should have lost, turned the tide of wars with nothing but tactical brilliance and absolute determination. "You're bluffing," the commander said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Even if you were Ruth Carter, you're years out of practice. You have no weapons, no support, no backup. What exactly do you think you can do against my entire force?" Ruth smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Let me show you." She moved 1 second she was standing still. The next she was in motion, faster than the KRYLL could track. She grabbed the nearest soldier's rifle, twisted it from his grip, and used it to sweep his legs out from under him. Before he hit the ground, she had the weapon aimed at the commander. "First lesson," she said, her voice perfectly calm. "Never assume your enemy is unarmed just because you can't see their weapons." The commander shouted orders. His troops raised their rifles. Ruth was already moving again, using the fallen soldier as cover, rolling behind a bench as energy bolts scorched the ground where she'd been standing. She came up firing, precise controlled bursts that took out weapon emplacements the KRYLL had set up around the square. Each shot hit exactly where she aimed, disabling equipment without killing the soldiers manning them. She wasn't here to massacre troops who were just following orders. She was here to make a point. "Second lesson," she called out, ducking behind a wall as return fire chewed up the stone. "Know your battlefield better than your enemy does." The KRYLL advanced in textbook formation, exactly like their training manuals taught. Ruth had read those manuals. She'd helped write the countertactics to them 15 years ago. She used the playground equipment as cover, the benches as obstacles, the decorative fountain as concealment. Every piece of the square became a tool in her hands. She took out their communication array with a well-placed shot, cutting them off from their ships. Disabled their heavy weapons before they could bring them to bear. Herded them into choke points where their numbers became a disadvantage instead of an advantage. The KRYLL commander watched in growing horror as his carefully trained soldiers fell back in disarray, outmaneuvered by one woman who fought like she could see 3 moves ahead of everyone else, because she could let Ruth's mind work through tactics the way other people breathed. She saw the battle as a whole, every variable, every possible outcome. And she'd been doing this since before most of these soldiers were born. "Retreat," the commander finally shouted. "Fall back to the landing zone." His troops didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled for their transports, leaving behind disabled equipment and wounded pride. Ruth let them go, tracking them with her rifle, but not firing. She'd made her point. The commander was the last to leave. He turned back to look at her, his expression a mix of fear and respect. "This isn't over," he said. "I have 3 warships in orbit. You can't fight an orbital bombardment." Ruth pulled out a small communication device from her jacket pocket. It was old, military grade, the kind that could punch a signal through interference that would shut down civilian equipment. "You're right," she said. "I can't fight 3 warships alone." She activated the device, and her voice went cold. "So I'm not going to." She entered a code she'd memorized years ago, one she'd sworn never to use again. The device beeped once, confirming transmission. Somewhere across the galaxy, old soldiers would be receiving her signal. Debts being called in, favors being collected, oaths being honored. The commander's communication device crackled to life. His ship's captain sounded panicked. "Sir, we're detecting multiple jump signatures throughout the system. Dozens of them. They're surrounding us." The commander looked at Ruth, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Who did you call?" He whispered. Ruth's smile was sharp and cold. "Everyone who owes me a favor. Turns out when you save enough lives, people remember." In orbit above New Haven, warships began to emerge from faster-than-light travel. Not colony defense forces, not local patrol ships. These were capital ships, dreadnoughts, carriers, each one bearing different insignia, different flags, different species, but all answering the same call, the call of the unbreakable wall. "Last chance," Ruth said to the KRYLL commander. "Leave now, or stay and find out why they call me that." The commander didn't hesitate. He ran for his transport, shouting orders for immediate withdrawal. Ruth watched the KRYLL ships break orbit and jump away, their retreat so hasty they left behind equipment and supplies. She stood in the center of the square, surrounded by the debris of the brief battle, and let out a long, shaky breath. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, from the adrenaline wearing off, from the weight of becoming the soldier again after so long pretending to be just a mother. Her communication device crackled. A familiar voice came through, warm and relieved. "General Carter, it's good to hear from you again. What are your orders?" Ruth closed her eyes. "General." She hadn't been called that in 5 years. "Stand down," she said quietly. "The threat is gone. Thank you for coming." "We'll always come when you call," the voice said. "You know that." She didn't know. That was the problem. Ruth deactivated the device and started walking back toward her house. Back to 3 scared dragons who were probably terrified, who'd just had their entire understanding of their mother shattered. She had no idea what she was going to tell them. The truth, she supposed. After today, there was no more hiding. The basement door was still locked when Ruth got home. She pressed her hand to the scanner, and it hissed open to reveal 3 dragons huddled together in the corner, their eyes wide with fear. "Mama." Smoke launched herself across the room, practically tackling Ruth with the force of her hug. Ash and Cinder were right behind her, all 3 of them trying to hold on to her at once. Ruth sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around them, breathing in their familiar scent. She was shaking, and she wasn't sure if it was leftover adrenaline or relief or fear of what came next. "Are you hurt?" Ash asked, pulling back to inspect her for injuries. "We heard explosions and shouting, and we wanted to help, but you said to stay here, and we didn't know what to do, and I'm fine," Ruth interrupted gently. "Not a scratch. The bad people are gone. You're safe." "Who were they?" Cinder asked. "Why did they come here?" Ruth looked at their trusting faces and felt something break inside her chest. She'd known this moment would come eventually. She just hoped it would be later. Much later. Maybe never. "Come upstairs," she said. "We need to talk." They followed her up to the kitchen. Ruth made tea with trembling hands, more for something to do than because anyone wanted it. The dragons sat at the table, watching her with identical expressions of confusion and worry. Finally, Ruth sat down across from them. She wrapped her hands around her mug, staring into the dark liquid like it might have answers. "I haven't been completely honest with you," she began. "About who I am, about my past." "We saw the room," Smoke said quietly. "All those weapons. That uniform. Mama, who are you?" Ruth took a deep breath. "My name is Ruth Carter. That part is true. But before I came to New Haven, before I found your eggs and decided to raise you, I was someone different. I was a general in the Galactic Defense Corps." The dragons exchanged glances. They'd learned about the Galactic Defense Corps in their history lessons. The massive military force that kept peace across hundreds of systems. The organization that fought wars and protected billions of people. "You were a soldier?" Ash asked, his voice small. "I was more than that," Ruth said. "I was one of the highest-ranking officers in the Corps. I led major campaigns, commanded fleets, made decisions that affected entire star systems." She paused, forcing herself to meet their eyes. They call me the unbreakable wall, because I never lost a battle. I never abandoned a position. I never let anyone break through my lines. Cinder's claws scratched nervously at the table. But you're our mama. You make breakfast and teach us reading and tell us bedtime stories. You're not a general. I'm both, Ruth said softly. Or I was. I thought I could leave the general behind. I thought I could just be your mother and nothing else. But today proved I can't escape my past completely. Is that why those ships came? Smoke asked. Because of you? No, Ruth said firmly. They came because they're raiders who attack weak targets. But I stopped them because I couldn't let them hurt people. I couldn't let them hurt you. Ash stood up from the table, pacing back and forth the way he did when he was trying to work through something difficult. Why didn't you tell us? All these years, why keep it secret? Ruth's hands tightened around her mug. Because I wanted to protect you. I wanted you to have a normal childhood, not grow up in the shadow of what I used to be. I wanted to be just your mother, not a legend or a hero or whatever else people call me. You lied to us, Cinder said. His voice wasn't angry, just hurt. You let us think you were just a normal person. I never lied. Ruth protested weakly. I just didn't tell you everything. That's the same thing, Ash said, still pacing. You let us believe something that wasn't true. That's lying. Ruth felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to cry in front of her children, even though they were right. She had lied, by omission if nothing else. You're right, she said. I should have told you. I should have been honest from the beginning. I just wanted so badly to give you a peaceful life, and I thought my past would ruin that. Smoke climbed down from her chair and walked over to Ruth. She was the smallest of the three, barely reaching Ruth's shoulder when standing. She put one small claw on Ruth's arm. Do you still love us? She asked. Ruth's heart shattered. Of course I do. More than anything in this entire galaxy. You three are the best thing that ever happened to me. Finding your eggs, raising you, watching you grow. That's been worth more than any battle I ever won. Then that's what matters, Smoke said simply. You're still our mama. The rest is just extra stuff. Ash stopped pacing. She's right. I mean, it's weird, and I'm still mad you didn't tell us. But you're still you. You still make terrible pancakes and tell bad jokes and tuck us in at night. My pancakes aren't that bad, Ruth said with a watery laugh. They're pretty bad, Cinder admitted. But we eat them anyway because we love you. Ruth pulled all three of them into another hug, holding them tight. They were growing so fast. Ash was almost as tall as her now. Soon they'd be bigger than her, strong enough to fly properly, old enough to make their own choices about their lives. I promise, she said into their scales. No more secrets. If you have questions about my past, I'll answer them honestly. All the questions? Ash asked. All of them. They pulled back, and Ruth saw the curiosity in their eyes. She knew what was coming. A flood of questions about battles and wars and the things she'd done. Part of her dreaded it. But they deserved the truth. Before anyone could ask anything, there was a knock at the door. Ruth tensed, old instincts kicking in. She motioned for the dragons to stay back and opened it cautiously. Administrator Willis stood there, looking exhausted. Behind him, Ruth could see at least a dozen people gathered in her yard. Colonists she recognized, people she'd lived among for 5 years without them knowing who she really was. Ruth, Willis said, can we talk? All of us. Ruth glanced back at her dragons, then nodded. Cool. The colonists filed into her small living room, packing it full. They looked at her differently now, not with the casual friendliness of neighbors, but with something else. Respect, fear, awe. We wanted to thank you, Willis began, for saving us, for protecting the colony. We had no idea who you were. I didn't want you to know, Ruth said. I just wanted to be normal. You're anything but normal, an elderly woman said. Not unkindly, just stating a fact. The fleet you called in is still in orbit. Their commanders are asking to speak with you. They want to know your orders. Ruth's stomach dropped. I gave them orders. Stand down and return to their posts. They're not following those orders, Willis said. They're waiting for you. Something about owing you their loyalty. Through the window, Ruth could see lights in the sky. Dozens of warships, each one crewed by soldiers who'd served under her command, or been saved by her tactics, or owed her their lives in one way or another. She looked at her 3 dragons, watching her with wide eyes. Looked at the colonists filling her house. Thought about the choice she'd made 5 years ago to walk away from everything. Apparently, the galaxy wasn't ready to let her go quite yet. 3 days later, Ruth stood in an open field outside the colony with 3 dragons at her side and a fleet of warships overhead. The ships had refused to leave despite her repeated orders, and their commanders had finally landed to speak with her in person. Now she faced a dozen officers, each one representing a different ship, a different species, a different part of the galaxy. But they all wore the same expression. Hope. General Carter, said Commander Hayes, a human woman who'd served as Ruth's tactical officer during the war. We need you back. The galaxy needs you back. Ruth shook her head. I'm not a general anymore. I haven't been for 5 years. The galaxy doesn't care how long you've been retired, said another officer, a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms. Conflicts are breaking out across the Outer Rim. The KRYLL attack on New Haven wasn't isolated. It's part of a larger pattern. Raiders, warlords, entire systems descending into chaos. Then the Galactic Defense Corps needs to handle it, Ruth said firmly. That's what they're for. Hayes stepped forward, her face sad. The Corps is stretched too thin. We've tried to fill the gap you left, tried to use the tactics you taught us. But it's not enough. We're losing battles we should be winning. Colonies are being destroyed. People are dying. Ruth felt the words like a physical blow. She looked at the gathered officers, saw the exhaustion in their faces, the weight they carried. I can't, she said quietly. I have responsibilities here. I have children to raise. Ash spoke up from beside her. Mama taught us to help people who need help, even when it's hard, even when we're scared. Ruth looked down at him, surprised. Cinder nodded in agreement. You always tell us that running away from problems doesn't make them go away, Cinder added. Isn't that what you're doing? Smoke tugged on Ruth's sleeve. We don't want you to leave. But we also don't want other people to get hurt if you could stop it. Ruth stared at her 3 dragons, pride and heartbreak mixing in her chest. When have they gotten so wise? If I go back, she said slowly, it won't be like before. I can't abandon you for months at a time, leading campaigns across the galaxy. I won't do that. Hayes smiled. We're not asking you to lead armies, General. We're asking you to teach, to train, to share your knowledge with the next generation of officers. You could do that from here or from a nearby station. Be close to your family while helping the galaxy. Ruth considered this. A teaching position, training new strategists and commanders. Your tactical manuals are still required reading at every military academy, another officer said. But reading about your strategies isn't the same as learning from you directly. Let us bring students to you. Let you shape the future of galactic defense without having to leave your children. It was a compromise. Not perfect, but better than she'd expected. Ruth looked at the dragons again. What do you 3 think? Will you still make breakfast? Smoke asked. Every morning. Will you still tuck us in at night? Ash asked. Every night I'm here. Will you teach us stuff too? Cinder asked. Like you teach the soldiers? Ruth smiled. If you want to learn, I'll teach you. The 3 dragons huddled together, whispering in that way they had when they were making group decisions. Finally, Ash spoke for all of them. We think you should do it. But we have conditions. Ruth raised an eyebrow. Conditions? You have to promise to take us with you sometimes, Ash said. We want to see the ships and meet the students and learn about what you do. And you have to promise not to get hurt, Smoke added. No dangerous missions or battles or anything. And you have to promise, Cinder said seriously, that we're still the most important thing. That no matter how many people need you, we come first. Ruth knelt down to their level, pulling all 3 into a hug. I promise. All of it. You 3 will always be my first priority. Always. She stood and faced the officers. I'll do it, but on my terms. I teach from New Haven or a nearby facility. My students come to me, not the other way around. And my children are involved in the process. They attend lessons. They meet the students. They're part of this. Hayes grinned. Done. We'll set up a training facility in orbit within the month. You'll have full control over curriculum and student selection. One more thing, Ruth said. No military rank. I'm not General Carter anymore. I'm just Ruth. A teacher. A mother. Someone who happens to know a lot about tactical strategy. The officers exchanged glances, and Ruth saw the disagreement in their faces. But Hayes nodded slowly. Understood. Just Ruth, then. Though I suspect your students will call you General anyway. They can call me whatever they want, Ruth said, as long as they learn. Over the next few weeks, Ruth watched as a training facility took shape in orbit above New Haven. It was smaller than a military academy, but equipped with everything needed to teach tactical strategy and command decisions. Hayes personally oversaw the construction, making sure it met Ruth's specifications. The first class of students arrived on a cool morning. 20 officers from different species, different backgrounds, all eager to learn from the legendary Ruth Carter. They gathered in the training facility's main hall, nervous and excited. Ruth walked in with 3 dragons trailing behind her. The students stared, clearly not expecting their teacher to arrive with children in tow. "Good morning," Ruth said, her voice carrying across the hall. "I'm Ruth Carter, and these are my children, Ash, Cinder, and Smoke. They'll be observing our lessons and occasionally participating. If anyone has a problem with that, you can leave now." Nobody moved. "Good," Ruth said with a small smile. "Let's begin. Who can tell me the biggest mistake most commanders make in their first engagement?" A young officer raised his hand tentatively. "Underestimating the enemy." "Close," Ruth said. "The biggest mistake is forgetting why they're fighting in the first place. Every battle, every decision, every order you give should come back to one question. What am I protecting?" She gestured to her dragons. "I protect them. They're my reason for fighting, my reason for teaching you. What's yours?" The students exchanged glances, thinking about the question. Ruth saw understanding dawn in their faces. "That's your first lesson," she said. "Strategy isn't about winning battles. It's about protecting what matters. Now let's talk about how to do that effectively." As she launched into the lesson, Ruth caught sight of Ash, Cinder, and Smoke watching from the side of the room. They looked proud, interested, engaged. This was going to work. She could be both the teacher the galaxy needed and the mother her dragons deserved. For the first time in 5 years, Ruth felt like all the pieces of herself had finally come together. 6 months passed in a routine that felt almost normal. Ruth taught her classes 3 times a week, always with the dragons present. Her students learned to expect Smoke's occasional questions or Cinder's thoughtful observations. Ash had even started helping demonstrate tactical formations using models on the strategy table. Life was good, peaceful, everything Ruth had hoped for. Then the alarms started again. Ruth was in the middle of a lesson on defensive positioning when Commander Hayes burst into the training hall, her face pale. "We have a situation," Hayes said without preamble. "Unknown vessels just appear at the edge of the system. They're not responding to hails, and their energy signatures don't match anything in our databases." Ruth felt ice settle in her stomach. "How many?" 12 capital ships. "And they're not slowing down. They're heading straight for New Haven." The students in the hall went silent, looking between Ruth and Hayes. Ruth's mind was already running through scenarios, calculating response times, assessing threats. "What kind of weapons are they carrying?" she asked. "That's the problem," Hayes said grimly. "Our scans show they're automated warships. No life signs aboard, and their design matches ancient records from the Machine Wars." One of the students gasped. Everyone who'd studied galactic history knew about the Machine Wars. A conflict from centuries ago when an artificial intelligence had built an army of automated ships programmed to destroy all organic life. The machines had been defeated, their fleets supposedly destroyed completely. Apparently not completely enough. "Mama." Smoke's voice was small and frightened. "What's the Machine Wars?" Ruth knelt beside her dragons, keeping her voice calm even as her mind raced through possibilities. "A long time ago, there were ships built by computers instead of people. Ships that didn't know the difference between soldiers and civilians, between threats and innocence. They just destroyed everything living. And they're coming here?" Ash asked. "It looks that way," Ruth said. She stood, turning to Hayes. "Evacuation status? Already in progress. We're loading civilians on a transport ships now. But General, we have a problem. The automated fleet is moving faster than our transports can jump to safety. They'll be in weapons range before we finish the evacuation." Ruth's jaw tightened. Then we buy them time. What forces do we have in system? Hayes pulled up a tactical display. Your training facility has minimal defenses. We have about 30 combat ships total, including the vessels that stayed after the KRYL incident, against 12 automated warships with technology we don't fully understand. Those aren't good odds, one of the students said quietly. Ruth studied the display, her mind working through the problem like she'd done 1,000 times before. The automated ships were in a standard search pattern, moving methodically toward the colony. They had superior firepower, but were bound by old programming, predictable patterns. We don't need good odds, Ruth said. We just need to slow them down long enough for the transports to escape. How? Hayes asked. Ruth pointed to the display. The automated ships are using a standard sweep formation from the Machine Wars era. I've studied their tactics. They prioritize targets based on threat assessment. If we can make our small fleet look more dangerous than the civilian transports, they'll focus on us. That's suicide, another student protested. 30 ships against 12 warships built specifically to destroy anything that fights back. Not if we're smart about it, Ruth said. She pulled up old battle records, overlaying them with the current tactical situation. During the original Machine Wars, Admiral Chun discovered the automated ships had a fatal flaw. They couldn't adapt to truly random tactics. They expected logical military maneuvers. She started marking positions on the display. We hit them with chaos. Unpredictable attack patterns, ships breaking formation at random, weapons fire from unexpected angles. It'll confuse their targeting systems long enough for the transports to jump away. Hayes studied the plan, her expression troubled. This requires someone to coordinate all those random movements in real time. Someone who can make it look chaotic while actually controlling every move. Ruth met her eyes steadily. I know, Mama, no, Cinder said, understanding what Ruth was planning. You promised you wouldn't do dangerous things. Ruth knelt down again, taking all 3 dragons' claws in her hands. I promised you come first. And you do. All those people evacuating, they have children too. Families. People they love. I can't let them die when I could save them. Then we're coming with you, Ash said firmly. Absolutely not, Ruth said. You're getting on a transport with everyone else. No, Smoke said, surprising everyone with the strength in her voice. You're always protecting us. Let's protect you for once. Ruth started to argue, but Hayes interrupted. General, we're out of time. The automated fleet just increased speed. We have maybe 20 minutes before they're in weapons range. Ruth looked at her dragons, seeing the determination in their eyes. They'd grown so much in a month she'd been teaching. Not just bigger physically, but stronger in spirit. And they were right. She'd spent years protecting them. Maybe it was time to trust them to help. You stay on the training facility, she said. You don't fly anywhere near the battle. But if you see an opening to help, a way to distract the enemy, or create confusion, you take it. Understand. All 3 nodded solemnly. Ruth stood, her command voice returning. Hayes, get our fleet into position. I want 3 groups of 10 ships each. Students, you're about to get a practical lesson in adaptive tactics. Everyone who's combat certified, you're flying today. The training hall erupted into motion. Students ran to their ships. Ruth headed for the command center with Hayes, the dragons following close behind. Yes, they walked. Cinder spoke quietly. Mama, are we going to be okay? Ruth didn't lie to them. I don't know, but I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure we are. That's all we can ask, Ash said. Ruth reached the command center and pulled up the tactical display. The automated fleet was closer now, their weapons charging. Behind New Haven, transport ships were still loading civilians, racing against time. Ruth took a deep breath, felt the familiar calm settle over her. This was what she did. This was who she was. Not just a mother, not just a teacher, but someone who stood between danger and the people who needed protecting. All ships, this is Ruth Carter, she said into the communication system. Today we're fighting an enemy that doesn't feel fear, doesn't know mercy, and doesn't understand surrender. But we have something they don't. We fight for the people we love. We fight to protect our homes. We fight because every life behind us matters. She paused, looking at her dragons, at Hayes, at all the faces watching her with trust and hope. So let's show these machines what happens when you threaten a mother's children. All ships, engage at will. Make it messy. The battle began. Ruth's fingers flew across the tactical display, directing ships with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. She sent fighters on seemingly random attack runs that were actually carefully calculated to create maximum confusion. Had ships break formation at unpredictable intervals. Ordered weapons fire from angles the automated fleet's programming never anticipated. The dragons watched from the observation window, seeing their mother do what she did best: protect people. The automated ships tried to adapt, but their ancient programming couldn't handle the chaos. They targeted ships that broke away, leaving openings for others to attack. They focused fire on the biggest threats, missing the smaller ships doing real damage. And slowly, impossibly, Ruth's ragtag fleet started winning. Last transport just jumped to safety, Hayes reported. All civilians are clear. Ruth allowed herself a small smile. Good. Now, let's finish this. She'd been holding back, waiting for the transports to escape. Now she unleashed everything, coordinating her fleet in a devastating final assault. The automated ships, designed to fight logical military tactics, couldn't cope with the organized chaos Ruth created. One by one, they fell. When the last automated warship exploded, the command center erupted in cheers. Ruth sagged in her chair, exhaustion hitting her all at once. Then, 3 small bodies crashed into her from behind. You did it. Smoke cheered. Mama, you won. Ruth hugged them tight, relief making her voice shake. We did it. All of us together. Hayes approached, saluting with a grin. Permission to speak freely, General. Granted. You're terrifying when you want to be, Hayes said. Those ships never knew what hit them. Ruth laughed, tired but genuine. Old habits. Later, after the celebrations died down and the fleet secured the system, Ruth sat in her kitchen with 3 exhausted dragons. She made them hot chocolate, a special treat reserved for important occasions. That was scary, Cinder admitted. I didn't know if we'd be okay. I was scared too, Ruth said honestly. But being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave. Is the galaxy always going to need you? Ash asked. Are there always going to be bad people or machines or problems that only you can fix? Ruth considered the question carefully. Probably. The galaxy is a big place with a lot of problems. But here's what I've learned. I don't have to fix everything. I just have to do my part. Teach people who can help. Protect the ones I love. Make the galaxy a little bit better wherever I am. And make breakfast for hungry dragons. Smoke asked hopefully. Ruth smiled. And make breakfast for hungry dragons. Always. She looked at her 3 children, seeing the dragons they were becoming. Strong, brave, compassionate. Everything she'd hoped they'd be. You know what? She said. I spent so long trying to be just a mother, or just a teacher, or just a soldier. But I think I finally figured it out. I'm all of those things. And that's okay. We like you being all those things, Cinder said. Even if it's complicated. Especially because it's complicated, Ash added. Ruth pulled them into one more hug, breathing in their familiar scent, feeling their scales warm against her skin. The galaxy might need her tactical genius. Her students might need her teaching. The Galactic Defense Corps might need her strategies and experience. But these 3 dragons needed their mama. And she needed them. Everything else could wait until after breakfast.